A particular pleasure this morning to introduce Tasia Cruz. Some of you know her. All of you, I'm sure, know her by reputation. Tasia was our first doctoral graduate and has gone on to do great things in Brazil. She is a professor at FGV Rio. And Tasia, what is your current job title? She is the Associate Director of CEIP, Centro de Educação, Inovações Políticas Educacionais Estaduais. Okay, anyway, but yes. Now since your boss has left or is leaving, do you have a change in your job title?
Yes, actually my change is now that I am going to be a professor, associate professor, and okay. And CEIP is going to end.
CEIP is going to end?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
I work at CEIP also.
Okay, well, yes. So
Professor at FGV BAP is my job title.
Okay. Anyway, congratulations on that, and we'll talk later about CEIP.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Anyway, so it's wonderful to have you here, and Tasia is going to talk about an experiment that was done in Rio about teacher mindsets. So Tasia, it's all yours.
Thank you. Good morning for you there in Stanford. Good afternoon for those of you who are online. It's a pleasure to present this work that I have been working on this topic of teacher growth mindset, teacher mindsets a while ago already. I think we started this project in 2018. So the result, I already presented a seminar at Stanford on the first results of this this research, and I'm going to present a continuation of what I have presented, and I'm going to show you some of what we have been doing, and hopefully in a year or so I present again with our new findings. So this research, and I'm happy to see Eduardo there in Stanford. He was my research assistant. He worked a lot on this research too. And our goal is to understand, and feel free to talk about it too, Eduardo. You know a lot about the field, so feel free to interrupt me anytime. So this research now, my goal is to understand how teachers' mindset affects student learning, and one of the mechanisms that we are believe that teacher mindset goes to student learning is through pedagogical practices. So last time I presented, I showed the impact that we found of teachers' growth mindset on pedagogical practice, and now I'm going to show what are these impacts on student learning. And we have really amazing results that I'm going to share, and I hope we have an interesting discussion about this topic. Is Eric Bettinger and Guilherme there? They are also working.
Sadly, no. Eric has a doctor's appointment, and
okay.
Philippe Guilherme has joined us, but he may still.
Okay.
We're recording your presentation so they can watch after.
Okay. So what is growth mindset? I believe many of you have heard of this term. Is the belief that abilities can grow, and this changed the idea that people were born with a fixed potential of fixed abilities that they could achieve or not, but rather that these abilities, and in these abilities we include intelligence, they can grow. And what is interesting in this concept is that the actual belief on this possibility of growing of abilities impacts this potential, the intelligence, the potential intelligence that people can achieve throughout their lives. So there has been a lot of research, a lot has been done in Stanford through Carol Dweck and other researchers that now have been doing interventions throughout the world that have shown that student interventions, that growth mindset intervention on students actually has an impact on student achievement. And more lately, we have been seeing a growing interest in teachers' mindset and the impact of teachers' mindset on student mindset. And we have seen some research already showing that it is important also not only to present this concept to students, but also the teachers must also believe that students, that this potential is not fixed for this mindset of students to sustain. However, this idea that teachers' growth mindset matter is relatively new, and we know little about what are effective interventions to improve teachers' mindset, and also how is this effect of teachers' growth mindset, how does that go to students? Is it through pedagogical practices? How is a classroom with a teacher with growth mindset, and how do these pedagogical practices impact in a growth mindset classroom? How does this impact student learning? And there's also we already know that student growth mindset is important, particularly in vulnerable students, but most of the studies that have been done in this topic, they are not done they're not in that vulnerable areas. They're mostly done in the United States and other rich countries. So it is interesting to see how these concepts they impact student learning in contexts like Brazil, and particularly in Rio de Janeiro, where we did this study, where many students are in vulnerable schools with dealing with a lot of armed violence, and so this becomes a particularly important point to analyze how growth mindset impacts student learning in this context. So we now, in this research I'm presenting now, I have two main research questions. The first is whether whether it is possible to change teachers' growth mindset. And for that, we did an intervention for teachers, and then we analyzed whether teachers' growth mindset changed by our intervention. And second, if teachers' growth mindset impacts student learning. If our intervention, so through our intervention, we are going to see whether the students in this that are in the classes of these teachers, whether they improve their performance in math and language, in Portuguese language. And then we look particularly at whether the increase in teacher growth mindset due to the teacher, to our intervention, if that improves student outcomes. Just anticipating the results before I present the research, the overall research, we observe.
Tassia, we have a question.
Yes, please.
Yes, hi. Eduardo, question for you too here. As you pointed out previously in your work, that there is no abundance of literature in that field, right? So how were you, I'm intrigued to understand how you were preparing the teachers so that they could run these interventions, and how long the process took, if it was lengthy training, like a short training, and if you're doing interventions as the curriculum was being deployed, And
Mhm.
that's what I wanted to understand. Because I find
Okay.
it's very interesting and very powerful at the same time. But it would be
Mhm.
interesting, and a lot of people tend to feel that those things are almost impossible because it requires a lot of, material support and so on.
Mhm,
So I'm
mhm.
interested to know what you guys used for this study.
Perfect. I'm going to jump then to what is the intervention, actually my next slide. And Eduardo, if you want to complement, please feel free. So the intervention itself was a workshop of 5 weeks that 2 hours meetings, one per week, that we did with teacher trainers from the municipality of Rio de Janeiro. We designed the intervention bringing all these ideas that we have in the literature, but we designed the intervention by ourselves because, as I mentioned, there were already some interventions for teachers, but they were not contextualized, and there wasn't we didn't know the actual impact of these other interventions. So we got everything that were out there built for teachers and built for students, and we know more of what impacts students' growth mindset, and then we adapted for teachers. And the idea of building this intervention, designing this intervention, was how to develop a growth mindset classroom. So we brought the concepts, but we ask, but more than discussing the concept of fixed and growth mindset, the idea of the brain as a muscle, how to deal with mistakes, frustration, and then we go to some specific topics, the idea of mindset trap, that mindset is not an ability itself, that mindset can also change, that that there that is usually is commonly how when you start talking about growth mindset, you then consider mindset as an ability that is fixed, and then no, you're not fixing people in being smart or not, but being a fixed or growth mindset. And anyways, we brought all of these concepts together, and then we worked with teacher trainers from Rio municipality to think how a classroom in fifth graders in municipal schools, how teachers could work with their students these concepts. And so we did a pilot in 2018 where we did focus groups on this workshop that we designed. We rebuilt, and then we applied the workshop in the beginning of 2019. Actually, who delivered the workshop were teacher trainers from the Secretariat of Education, because our idea was that we wanted teachers to change their mindset, their beliefs. And so we thought that our research team, we don't have the language to talk with the teachers and the understanding of what is the reality of schools that the teacher trainers from the Rio municipality would have. So then we worked with these two teacher trainers, and they were the ones who delivered the training.
And
I don't know
a follow-up question. This was a good answer. A follow-up question. How did you prepare the teacher training material? So this was something that you guys did within your research group and ahead of time. Is this because this is probably a valuable material that could be, scaled and expanded into other municipalities, I suppose?
Yes, we did in our research team in this pilot in 2018. And yes, we have thought a lot about that, about how if this training, if this workshop, the way we design, if we could scale it. But one a premise, a hypothesis in all in this design was that we wanted to understand whether teachers' growth mindset affected their pedagogical practice and student learning. Today I'm presenting the second part, but that was our goal in this research design, and not design a workshop that could be used any other place. So the idea was to design a workshop that was very contextualized, that it works for the context of Rio de Janeiro schools. Yes, we have a lot that we have learned that could be scaled up, but then that was not our goal. So for that, we would have to work more on what can be used in other contexts and what is specific to Rio. So
Yeah, Tasha, can I add something?
please.
Because by the time we're preparing and implementing the workshops, that was before the pandemic. And most of the literature on mindset interventions are computer-based training, mostly here in the US. So you have teachers, or mostly students actually, they'll do like sessions on a computer. And we felt before the pandemic, especially, that this wouldn't really work in Brazil because we don't have this culture. So the way we ended up implementing it, it was designed, as Tasha said, with teachers from like 5th year, designed with them and also presented by them at their facility at the Escola de Formação Paulo Freire. So we were, at the end, we feel like we're reproducing like an in-house training, teacher training as they do, rather than more aligned with the standard literature and mindset where it's computer-based. So I felt like this helped a lot teachers to like trust. It gave legitimacy to the thing, rather than having, oh, this is a training given by Fundação Ayrton Senna or whatever. Which is good, but then it's from the outside. They perceive this as coming from the inside, and I think this might have a good effect.
Yeah, an important, just to add to what you said, and I'm going to just mention that in the end, that in 2021, we did another intervention that I don't have the results yet, that I mentioned in the beginning, that was all online. Because of the pandemics, we thought, okay, can we scale up and do an intervention online like we see in the literature that has the impact that we have seen with this intervention? So we designed an intervention online with all the topics, and we try to continue with this goal of developing a growth mindset classroom. And we did the intervention online, and then we did the data collection in the end of the year, like we did here in 2019. I have only preliminary results that I didn't bring today, but the results are not as close to what we saw in this intervention. Most of the impact that we see here was lost with the online intervention. And a lot, I believe, and that's still preliminary results, but I believe that a lot of this loss by turning it into an online intervention was due to the lack of engagement of the teachers in the online course, in the online workshop, compared to the in-person one, where teachers really got involved in the sessions and did the homework with the students, which means that they got the activities, took to their classrooms, went back to the workshop, discussed about that. In the online intervention, we didn't see that strong engagement as we saw here. So the results are not they're still preliminary, but they are not as strong as we saw here. Okay.
So can I just make a follow-up question on this topic? You may
Yes.
touch on this during your presentation, but did you guys develop a assessment of growth mindset that you apply to students kind of to sort of understand pre and post intervention, what the results were, or because I understand that's a complicated topic as well.
We did. Our first result is specific on teachers' growth mindset, where we and then I'm not presenting here. We also applied a questionnaire on students to see whether students' mindset changed. We didn't do pre and post. Our methodology is treatment versus control because we have a randomized experiment. So and I'm going to show you that our sample is, the lottery was very balanced. So we actually are very comfortable with just the comparison of treatment and control. And the development of these questionnaires, I actually can move this. These pictures are from the interventions here in the right, and the students working on the growth mindset activities. I don't know, I can't, moving to I know I can. This was an idea of a teacher on how to bring this idea of yet. That is an important idea that in the growth mindset literature. So just moving to your question. So to develop the teacher's growth mindset and in the student growth mindset, we did a similar process where we got what we have in the literature of growth mindset questionnaires. We started using Carol Dweck's The Implicit Theory of Intelligence, but we saw that many authors are using more than the questions that are in Dweck's questionnaire. So, but we didn't find any questionnaire applied to 5th grade students or to students in this age range. So we translated the questions, we adapted to the ages, and we tested in our pilot in 2018. So we have this questionnaire for teachers' growth mindset, for student growth mindset. We analyze the quality of the questions in the first in the pilot. So here we have I would say a pretty strong index of growth mindset. The one we use mostly is this ITIS, Implicit Theory of Intelligence Scale, which is the one that worked better for the teachers and the adaptation for that for the students. In our questionnaire, we in addition to that, we also ask questions about socioeconomic and some personal characteristics, and we applied the social desirability questions just to control for the issue that I think that's what you're mentioning, that is complex, that what we are estimating as being growth mindset is in fact the perceived growth mindset from as how teachers perceive themselves as having or not growth mindset. So this is what to control for that somewhat, we ask questions that are kind of telling us that the teacher is just answering what is socially desirable or not. The same thing for students, but adapted by our research team. Okay, I'm going to return just to go through all the presentation. I think a lot a lot of what I was going to say I already presented, so I'm going fast on this. So just to anticipate the results, we find really strong evidence that teachers do change their mindset, even in the socially vulnerable context, and that an increase in teachers' growth mindset has a positive and significant effect on student learning, particularly on math. The results on language are not, they lose significance after we include all of our controls. So the intervention, I think I already discussed it well. Our sample, we invited all of the schools in Rio de Janeiro municipality, which had 1 or 2 fifth grade classrooms. Why is that? Is because we, our treatment, our control was in the level of schools. So a school was treated or not, because we believe that the change in the culture of the school is what would impact student learning. And therefore, if one teacher had an increase in growth mindset and the other, this would, it would be hard to identify if they work together, which is what we hope they do. So we only worked with schools that were smaller from the average. And if both teachers, if the school had more than 1 class, both teachers would have to agree to participate or not. Then we invited all of these schools, which in 2019, there were 395. 252 schools came to the meeting as we invited, and 178 schools enrolled to participate, which means that there were 324 fifth grade teachers enrolled in our intervention. From these 178, we randomly assigned them to treatment and control and I'm going to show you how we did that. We paired the schools by their baseline characteristics, and then we did the randomization by pairing. Then, in the end of the year, we went back to the schools to apply the questionnaire, and we also did classroom observations to analyze pedagogical practices that I'm not going to go through. This other part of the research is the one that I presented the other time. But in the end, if you have any questions about the classroom observations, I'll be happy to answer too. And then we lost some schools from when we were applying the questionnaire or doing the classroom observations, particularly the classroom observations, because there were some teachers, but not so many. We lost 26 schools that did not agree with having their classroom observed for the research. And so in the end, we have 273 teachers who answered the questionnaire and 271 classroom observations. We registered this research in the beginning. And so all of these numbers were there since the beginning, since when we started the research. All of our, how we do the randomization, everything was decided beforehand. So here, just to show the difference between these schools and other fifth grade schools in Rio de Janeiro. And in fact, our sample is really close to representative of Rio de Janeiro schools with fifth grade schools, except that they were smaller, and that was by choice because we chose schools with 1 or 2 fifth grades, and they also had higher baseline math results. So they were a little smaller with a little higher than average math results. Otherwise, the percentage of male students, Black teachers, students who work were not different between between our sample and the rest of Rio de Janeiro schools. Also, the schools that we lost, the 26 schools that we lost, they are not very different from our schools with complete information, except for a percentage of students whose mother has completed higher education, that our sample had a higher percentage of students that their mothers have higher education. But all other student characteristics, school characteristics were very similar between the schools that we got all the information and the schools that we lost, the 26 schools that we lost. And here,
Sorry.
yes, please.
Did you compare with the previous year result? Because maybe the school already had a good performance. So in order to measure the impact, you have to compare with the previous years to see if there was an improvement. You do that. And ideally, you should do also the following year to see if the effect will remain. That would be the ideal. I don't know if it-
I'm not sure I heard it well, but this data that I'm showing here, the comparisons, they are all in 2017, so before the intervention. The intervention happened in 2019. So
Okay.
these are the baseline student results and before the intervention. And then when we analyze the impact of our intervention, we'll see the results from the end of 2019, the SAEB, that was after the intervention. So here is just to show you that these schools were not very different before from all the administrative data that was there. We didn't collect any data before. As I said, we only collect afterwards. And I'm trying to convince you that there was no reason to collect before, because these schools are very similar before the intervention in all of
Tassi, can I
the.
just add
Yes,
to
please.
that? Because your point, it's about before and after. It would be like a different methodology, but this is the gold standard of like economics experiment in school, that you get schools who are very similar, and then you do something with one of them and like the workshops, and then after a while you'll measure again to see what's the difference between them. You could do what you're saying, but this is trickier because you cannot tell how schools differ from the get-go. So this is a more robust methodology.
Okay.
Yeah, so this is a randomized intervention. So being in a treatment or control was done by lottery. And I'm showing you that this lottery worked well. We did a nice randomization that before they were similar in all the characteristics that we have. And I'm also showing that they are similar from other fifth grade schools in Rio, and that the schools that we lost are also not very different from the schools that we have complete information. Okay,
Can I ask a question?
please.
So I just want to know, like, in terms of the intervention itself, because your title say teacher mindsets, but then in the picture you show like the teacher had some intervention with the students. So I want to understand, what are you changing the mindset of the teacher, or is there ways for teachers to bring this change of mindset for the students? So how, I understand the
Okay.
topics, but like, what is the intention of change? What does it mean, the teacher change or the student changing in
Okay.
mindset?
Our intervention was focused on teachers. We did a workshop for teachers with the goal for them to change their pedagogical practices to develop a growth mindset classroom. Why we are interested in changing growth mindset of teachers? Well, we believe it's important for them, but our goal is that these teachers will change how they act in the classroom, and therefore they will impact their students. So we work with teachers, and then we analyze whether this change in teachers' growth mindset impacted their student learning.
In terms of the self-efficacy, in terms of like they believe that they can teach in a way that students learn. Is in that sense?
Yes, what we would like to see, and what we observe in this other data that we collected, that I said I was going to present today, that we observe that teachers changed how they act in the classroom. So teachers with a growth mindset, there was a question actually. We wanted to see how teachers with growth mindset acted differently when they were with their students. We saw that teachers with growth mindset, they promote a better classroom culture, which means that they work with all students instead of just picking some students to teach. We saw, so they promote a more equitable classroom. They give more constructive advice when students are misbehaving. Instead of just punishing the students, they give constructive advice. And so we have all of these categories that we analyze how teachers changed in their classroom. But our intervention was focused on teachers, and then we hope teachers change the way they act in the classroom, their pedagogical practice, and therefore we believe that they will impact student learning. So what
Yeah,
I'm
but could
Yes.
it be because they start believing more that the students can learn, that the students can have potential to grow, right? Because before they thought that some are good, some are bad, and there's nothing you can do. And now they see the students' growth mindset potential. Is it
Exactly. That's since teachers, as they participate in the workshop and they change their beliefs, they would now have this growth mindset not only for them but for their students. So they believe that students don't have a fixed potential that they can achieve or not, that some students it doesn't matter whatever I do, I can't, the student won't learn. So by changing this idea regarding the students, they change the way they teach, and therefore they might change student growth mindset, and they might change student learning by the changes in pedagogical practices.
Thank you.
Yeah, and just to add something, because you can ask teachers if, how do you perceive yourself, mindset's all survey based. And that's one measure, but we wanted to see like, okay, so how can we see on the ground if teachers are changing? So there's a classroom observation data collection where you could see like by protocol, but then it could also be the case that teachers are changing their practices, but in terms of measurable outcomes, it's not changing a lot. So that's why we use the SAEB scores to sort of like have different measures of how this is working out.
Adilson?
Tasia, thank you very much for your very interesting presentation. So your research is actually directly connected with my research project here at Stanford. I'm writing a book about racial literacy, and all articles and books I've read so far show that professors, and specifically white professors, have lower expectations toward Black students. So can you talk a little bit more during the rest of your presentation, how race, the intersection of race and gender, determines what kind of attitude white professors and professors general have towards Black students, and specifically toward Black male students, who are the most, the group of students who face more hostile environment in educational settings. Thank you.
Thank you, Adilson. So this research specific, the 2019 intervention, we didn't focus on these specific groups to analyze race and gender, but with the data that we collected, it became clear that particularly race was important in how teachers interacted with students. And one side result that we found was that from this data of classroom observations, that we have data, for example, how much time teachers spend in pedagogical activities versus management of the classroom. And we saw that Black teachers, when they were working with a higher percentage of Black students, they spent more time in pedagogical activities. And when white teachers were working with a higher percentage of Black students, they spent less time in pedagogical activities and spent more time on classroom management. And I think that shows a little, starts showing that and I think that talks a lot with a lot of research that was done, even in Stanford. Tom D has a article that shows the importance of having Black teachers with Black students and how that is positive to student learning. And our result on this matching of race between teachers and students shows that this matching matters for how teachers work in terms of classroom, of time management in the classroom, that white teachers probably deal with Black students spending more time on keeping them quiet, or instead of promoting more learning. Anyways, I think there's a lot still to learn about that, but there is an important point here that we should see. And so in our 2021 intervention, we did we focused our intervention, the online one that I mentioned. We improved our intervention, so we moved to online, and we increased the examples of race. So when we were talking about stereotype threats, we were talking about race. When we were thinking about creating a safe learning environment, we mentioned race. So our intervention was focused on promoting racial equity in the classroom, as we believe that a higher growth mindset necessarily should be associated with a more equitable classroom considering race. And so that was our 2021 intervention. And so, we're still, our results are not very promising in terms of the impact as we saw here. And I believe a lot of that is because of the online intervention, but we also created an index of racial equity in the classroom that we are now starting to analyze to see whether we could impact racial equity with this type of interventional growth mindset. So we are starting to study about that too, because we believe there is a lot, as you mentioned, when we are talking about growth mindset, and that the belief that all students can learn, and this is related to fixed stereotypes. And I think an important stereotype in Rio de Janeiro municipality is related to Black male students. So this is where we are now in this research regarding race specifically.
I have a
Excellent,
follow-up.
thank you.
And we have one more from Edu before I let you ask your question. Let me just say, Tassia, these are excellent questions and
Mhm.
they are, I think, anticipating probably most of your slides.
So go ahead to your.
So I think
Yeah.
we're happy to answer the questions now. But if there are things that are in the slides that you want to tell us that people are not asking about, make sure that you get to those too, okay? But I think
Okay.
this is a very good discussion. I'd like to keep the discussion going. But I want to make sure that you reserve enough time to get to whatever you think is most important. But I do go ahead, please.
Okay, that, okay, thank
Just
you.
I'm gonna let Edu ask his question now.
No.
because I think the
Okay,
discussion-
sorry.
The
Mhm.
point here, Tassi and Eduardo, is I think this is an amazing intervention. I'm glad you guys did it. I'm just anxious to understand what happened next.
Wait.
Okay, here it
So-
comes.
So here it comes, because it's nice, it's beautiful, but it's a small. And it's, it's not gonna move the needle. It's important, but it's not gonna take us anywhere much further. It's important. But it's an amazing exercise and data point, and I'm eager to see. I had my own experience with this. We had a network of schools in Pernambuco where we did something similar.
Mhm.
This was back in 2015, and essentially we felt the same patterns in a different context, different environment, but somewhat similar. So, what happened?
Okay, I do have a slide on what we'll do next, but I will leave that to the end. Okay, so just going to our estimations and results. So our first question is whether we were able to impact teachers' growth mindset. And for that, as I said, we have a randomized experiment. So our estimation is really simple. We're just comparing treatment and control schools and then analyzing how that affect teachers' growth mindset. We have a lot of controls just to these pairs that we have and just to control for all other characteristics that for some reason in our randomized intervention they were not completely balanced. So here visually I didn't translate that. Visually we can already start seeing our result on teachers' growth mindset. What this graph is telling us, this is an indicator of growth mindset. More to the right, it means that the teacher perceives to have a higher growth mindset, and the red line refers to the treated schools, the blue line to the control schools, and then we see a shift in growth mindset. When we look at the statistical results, we see a similar impact as we saw visually. And here in our preferred estimation with all the controls, these are the teachers, so the grades. And what we see is that the teachers in the schools that participated in the treatment, that participated in the workshop, had a significant increase in growth mindset. Okay. Is this increase in growth mindset associated with student outcomes? And for that, we want to know whether our intervention improves student outcomes, if the students in the schools, in the treated schools, had higher performance in math and language. And also, and I think this last question is our main question, is our most important point here, is whether teachers with growth mindset, if they improve student learning more than other teachers that have lower index of growth mindset. And as I showed so far, we use this increase in growth mindset by the intervention. So teachers who participated in the treatment, in the intervention, they increase their mindset, as we just saw, and that was randomly assigned. So we can estimate whether this random increase in growth mindset through our intervention, whether this affects student learning. And so first, in this first point, here for math test scores, the difference between the columns is just that I'm adding more controls in the estimation. So it's the same estimation of being treated or in a control schools on student math test scores. And here, this last column with all the controls, what we see is that students in the treated schools had a significant increase in math test scores in 0.3 standard deviations, around 0.3 standard deviations. When we look at language test scores, our result is not so significant, and actually it loses significance when we include student characteristics controls. And then going to the last question, as I mentioned, how we do that, we want to know whether teachers with growth mindset, students that are in these classrooms with teachers with growth mindset have an increase in SAEB, and this increase in growth mindset is randomly defined by a treated school. So we are using an instrument, the lottery, the assignment of treatment and control, which I showed you to be random, as an instrument for the increase in growth mindset, and then the effect of this increased growth mindset on SAEB. And I include all of these controls. Here I'm using the SAEB microdata, so the data is in student level, so I'm able to include all the individual students' controls. And what we see here, so this is an instrumental variable, and what this is the first stage, just to remind you that the schools, the teachers in the treatment schools have an increase in growth mindset. That was our first result. But then we see that teachers with growth mindset do increase students' scores, particularly in math. Here with the IV estimation, with the instrumental variable estimation, the coefficient is a little smaller, but it's still very high. When we go to language test scores, again, each column is just increasing the controls. So here is our main estimation. Column 4 is our main estimation with all the controls. In our main estimations, we lose the significance, which means that the results in language, they are not so robust as we see in math. So just to conclude, before I go to the question of what to do next, and then answer other questions, we find robust evidence that teachers increase growth mindset after participating in the workshops. Students in classes where teachers participated in growth mindset workshops had a significant improvement in math test scores, but no significant change in language. This increase is particularly high, of 0.3 standard deviations. That's considered, I'll say, few interventions in education, as you know, lead to such high coefficients, in such increase in test scores. And the students whose teachers have growth mindset also increase math test scores, but the change in language is not so significant. And I didn't show you today, I mentioned a little bit, which is an important part of the research, but I would say that would be a presentation itself. That is the other article we are writing, that there is evidence that what is underlying the mechanism that leads to, that is moving this change from teacher growth mindset to student learning, are the changes in pedagogical practices. We saw particularly that there was an increase in classroom culture and the quality of instruction, that we have this information from this Teach Plus methodology, which is a classroom observation methodology that we applied. So we believe that this increase in teachers' growth mindset, this effect of the increase in growth mindset to student learning happens through changes in pedagogical practice of the teachers in these schools. And just looking forward, what we are doing with all of these results, we are doing, as I mentioned to Adil, so we did another intervention in 2021. It was an online intervention where we are evaluating the long-term effects of mindset. We are evaluating different formats of delivering the workshop. And I think that in part talks about those questions of how we can expand this intervention. And so we are analyzing whether, okay, we have a very significant effect, a very important in a short term of the intervention and the analysis, we observe such a significant effect. So that tells us that it is important to discuss growth mindset, particularly in the context of more vulnerable schools, like in Rio de Janeiro, where students are dealing with a lot of violence and state violence most of the time, and how this is associated with stereotypes of students, that some students can't learn because they come from favela X, and how we can change a little bit of that with interventions like this. However, this intervention is expensive, is a workshop in person, 5 weeks to do with all of these teachers. It's 273 teachers. We had to work very closely with the secretariat, with the municipal secretariat of education, and all of the teachers had to go to this place. So to expand in a cheaper way, we thought that maybe we could transform this intervention to an online format. My initial idea is that from the results we are estimating that now is that it is if we want to change beliefs, it is important that we do interventions that are in person, that teachers really engage with the trainers and rethink the ways of how students learn and how they perceive learning in their daily lives. And so I think there is still a lot to learn before expand. Okay, let's do a workshop throughout Brazil and we'll change education. I don't think that would happen with this intervention, but I think that this type of intervention has a great potential to improve, to change how people perceive intelligence, and I think it can eventually enter teacher training throughout Brazil. And just a final point that I already mentioned a little bit, this other intervention we did in 2021, we focused on improving racial equity, because from the results we saw in the 2019 data, and this question of Adil, so always when we present to the Secretariat of Education, the teachers, this question always come when we are talking about stereotypes and students that are fixed in the idea that some students can't learn. Usually we are talking about Black students, Black male students. And so it is, when we are talking about growth mindset in Brazil, we need to talk, and probably not only in Brazil, we need to talk about racial equity. So we are bringing these concepts into our training and to learn more about that.